So this is going to be an introduction to RxJS, Reactive JavaScript, and it's essentially a library that allows us to write code in a structured way such that asynchronous and event-driven requests can be handled more effectively using observable sequences. So the first thing we want to do is we just want to set up a basic HTML and JavaScript, and we're going to go ahead and use this CDN. We're going to click on the RxJS 6.00 and higher, and we'll just click on that, and then right at the top in the URL we can change the @version, and let's just type in 6 here, and that will get us 6.5.5, and we can copy this CDN link, and what we can do is we can open up a new project and we'll create a new file for the index HTML file. And what we're going to do is we'll use Visual Studio Code and we'll use Emmet, so we can just do an exclamation mark, get a boilerplate up, and then just in the head you can get this script :source, and that we can copy and paste that CDN right there. We'll also do a script at the just before the body closes, so we'll create an index JS file, so index.js, and we'll go ahead and we'll save that, and then we'll create that index.js file. Okay, so this is going to be RxJS introduction. So first things first, let's just create a button in the HTML page so we have something that we can click. So let's do that. So we'll create a button, we'll just say button, and then what we'll do is we will just check that our script and everything's working, so we'll say const button. This is going to be equal to the document. We'll do the query selector for button, and then what we'll do is we'll just do we'll add an event listener, and then for a click event, what we'll do is we'll use this arrow function syntax, and we'll just console log clicked. Okay, so if we go over to the browser, well, firstly I'll open it up in live server. So let's open that up, and if you don't have live server, there's an extension in Visual Studio Code by Ritwick, and it offers hot reloading, so I'll definitely download or install that. And if I press F12 and we go to the developer tools and we click the button, we get our regular events in JavaScript that we're all familiar with. And RxJS, Reactive JavaScript, it heavily uses functional programming techniques such as higher order functions, so it's pretty important to be familiar with you know, from JavaScript, like the filter, the map sort of methods and all those sorts of things, and be working with promises and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, if you're familiar with this sort of things, this will provide a much powerful way to access that asynchronous data and do things to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and use the CDN. So we've got this RxJS library, so let's go ahead and we'll just we'll change this code so that we're using an observable. And there's two main concepts in RxJS that are fundamental, and the most fundamental is the notion of an observable. So what is an observable? And an observable represents the idea of an invocable collection of future values or events. And we'll go into that in a minute. And the second most important thing, or most used thing in RxJS, is operators. And that allows us to handle data, to use and customize that data through transformations. So let's go ahead and put that definition into practice, and we'll go ahead and we'll just comment out this function here, this event listener. And what we'll do is we'll access the RxJS package, the library which we do have access to through this CDN here. And for now we won't go into installing with npm or anything like that. Just do a quick overview to see the power of it. And okay, so RxJS has an observable, and this observable is called from event. And it functions in the same way as, or a similar way to the add event listener. So we have our button queried with the query selector. So if we go ahead and access that button, and that's a variable that we've accessed through the DOM. If we provide a click event on that button, what we want to do is we want to return something. And in this current state, we have an observable, but an observable isn't, it won't do anything unless we are aware of that observable. So to become aware of this observable, we can subscribe to the observable. So we're going to go ahead and we can subscribe, and that subscribe method takes in a arrow function, and we can return, and we'll just do a console log saying clicked, and I'll put 2 exclamation marks here this time. And so if we save this and we go ahead and we go to the console, what we can see is when we click button, we get clicked. So we've effectively changed the regular JavaScript into an RxJS observable stream, and we've accessed this from event observable from the RxJS library. You know, it takes in the DOM element and the event method similar to how the event listener does, and we're subscribed to that, and we're returning a console log saying clicked. Okay, so that's the first example, and it's not overly useful because at this point you may as well just use the add event listener. But we'll see why this RxJS is powerful after we just cover a couple of these basic concepts. So another thing that we could do is in regular JavaScript, let's say we wanted to every time we click it, we can increment the count starting from 0. So we'll initialize this variable count and we'll assign it to 0. And what we can do is we can copy this event listener from before, and effectively what we can do is we can use this template literal syntax. So we can say use backticks and say clicked, and then we can increment that variable count, and then we can say we've clicked it such many times. So that's just regular JavaScript at the moment, and if we click that, we'll get clicked 1 time. Okay, so what RxJS can do for us is it can create values using pure functions, and pure functions are less prone to error. So let's say we had this count variable somewhere else in the application or in the file that's, you know, could get incremented in a different way or something like that. You know, when it's in different places like that, the state of the variable can be prone to error. So in RxJS we can add some purity to the function by isolating this state. So rather than having this sort of syntax here, if we go back to our RxJS observable syntax, when we click on the button from this event, we console log a message, but what we can do is we can use what's known as a pipe operator. And okay, so if I go ahead and I pipe, and now I'll need a RxJS operator. So it's important to note that the from event function or method here from the RxJS library, that is an observable. And what we want to do is we want to transform the observable into a new form. So we need to perform an operation on it. To do that, we need to pipe our observable such that a pipeable operator can do something on it. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the two fundamental concepts from RxJS is an observable and operators. And these operators are really what give RxJS its power to be able to transform our data or manipulate the data from an observable and do something with it. So to connect the observable with an operation, because this is an observable, we can use this pipe method, which takes this observable and then we can do something with that. So what we'll do is we will increment the count starting from 0. So to do that, there is a scan operator from RxJS. So we can access that by rxjs.operators to go into the operators, and we can access the scan method. And what this can do for us is it can take a callback. So the scan operator can take an initial value as well. So, but let's just set this up. So it takes a count, and this is going to return count plus 1, and it's going to have an initial count of 0. So we don't actually have to define count to 0 explicitly, like in its own assigned variable. We can do that in this method here. And yeah, the scan operator can take an initial value of 0 in its callback, so that will be 0 by default, and the return value, so recall that the arrow function returns by default in the one-liners, the return value of the callback will then become the next value. So, 1, then if you click it again, 2, then click it again, and 3, and this is exposed the next time the callback runs. So this is the observable. We need to do something with that observable, so we can pipe that observable into an action, let's say, and then we can subscribe to that. So this is still returning an observable. Well, it's returning an observable, but it's doing something with the observable, and we need to subscribe to the observable to register it. So let's go ahead and do that, but let's just copy this template literal here so we can see it in action. So let's save that. Go ahead and refresh our index. If we click button, okay, so we get count is not defined. Why would that be? Okay, so we no longer have to increment the count for one thing. So let's just save that. If we click the button, okay, count is not defined. Count is not defined. So what we want to do is, okay, this is expecting, the subscribe is expecting that count to be passed to it, so that we can take the original observable, which we click the button, and then we can do something with it, and then we can get the count for that, and then we can pass that in to the subscribe method by passing it in like that. So now if we click a button, we get clicked one time. If we click it again, click 2 times. Maybe that should be an S, I don't know. And so on. So the observables, they're declarative, meaning that all the operations and transformations, so in this case the pipe and from event, they're specified in their entirety from the start. So the observable stream needed to be subscribed to so it can be executed. Okay. So let's move on from that to a concept known as flow. So we'll just comment this out. Actually, we might just copy this and then comment it out. So what we'll do, so RxJS, they have a whole range of operators that help you control how the events flow through your observables. So let's just save this again. And one thing to note is we can have multiple operators, multiple pipeable operators. So we'll call that the pipeable operators. These are the operators that, you know, they can do something with from the event, or the data passed in from the event, and these are performed in order. So let's say that we wanted to delay our clicking, so we can't just constantly click and get it. So at the moment, if we click it and we keep clicking it, you know, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But let's say we want to you know, emit the first value and then ignore it for a specified period of time. There's this other operator, RxJS. So we'll go to the library and we'll go to the operators, and we can call this throttle time. And, you know, we just use a comma here like this. And what this throttle time will do for us is it sort of controls the flow through our observable. So we click this observable, and after, you know, 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second, so what it will do, it will fire off initially. So if you click it, it will initially fire off, so it emits the first value. But then if you click it again, it will ignore that value for, you know, this 1,000 millisecond specified period of time. So now if I save that and I click on button, you can see that I'm clicking it, but it's only giving me it back once every second. So that's the concept of flow, and there's a whole bunch of operators that can impact flow. This is just sort of a broad overview of RxJS, and we'll go more into like the concepts a lot more in detail. This is more just to display, you know, what the point of it is and how to use some of it. Yeah, so we can also transform values passed to our observables or passed through our observables. So if I just go ahead and copy that again, and I uncomment it out, we can use the another operator, a value changing operator, from RxJS.operators, and we can map, or we can use the map operator. And let's say we wanted to, so we know when we click a button, it's optional to pass an event in. So let's say in regular JavaScript, we can pass an event in here like this, and then we can console log that event. And that has a whole bunch of details like X position, Y position, window height, and all that sort of stuff like that. Well, if we can do the same thing in RxJS, and we can click on when we fire our click event, so from that event, and we can pipe a few operators together. So these perform in order. So these last two will only occur if this first one's occurred, and and they go in order. So what we can do here is, rather than getting all of our event details back, we can use this map operator, and for the event we can return just the event, the client X position, for example, and we can put a comma here, and we can essentially do the same sort of thing here. We don't necessarily have to have this return here, by the way. So let's just do that. And okay, so let's just do clicked. Let's just do count. Let's just do that here like that, and we'll save that, and we'll see what this is doing for us. So if we click a button now, we get 1, 2. If I keep clicking it back, it still takes a second to respond. But we weren't necessarily interested in just that. We want, okay, so in addition to scan, okay, so what we'll do here is every time we click on a button, let's say we've clicked it and the X position is 50. If we click it again, we want to accumulate that position. So if we click it again, it'll be 100. If we click it again at the X position of 50, it'll be 150, and so on. So this, yeah, so in the map operator, what we can do is we can, we filter through the data essentially and just return what we need. So that's the client X position. So with that X position, what we can do, and scan has a second parameter that we can add to it, with the client X position, so we've got that from above here. So with the client X, what we can do is, rather than returning one more than the number, what we can do is we can say, okay, let's still do the count, but count plus client X. And this isn't to say that you have, so in the first instance you pass in this 0, and that's what count will be. And let's say you click on a client X position at the the 50 mark, 50 pixel mark, whatever. This will be 0, this will be 50, and then this will return 50, and then this value that gets returned will be passed back in for count. So then this new value will be 50. If we click 50 again, it'll be 50 plus 50, which will be 100, and so on. So yeah, recall that the scan operator applies a function to each item emitted by an observable sequentially, and emits each successive value. So the result of this gets fed back in essentially into the function, and the process is repeated. So it's very similar to what is it? Reduce, the JavaScript reduce higher order function. And yeah, we're able to do this because with the map operator before it, we've sort of extracted those details, so we can get those details and go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and do that. And this time, okay, so let's just do that. Now if we click it at the 50 position, we get 50, 100, 150. If I keep clicking it, I only get a result back every 1 second, and they're incrementing by 50 as expected. So this has been an overview of RxJS, and this is just to see sort of what it can do and why we would use it, and hopefully we can start to see like how it has the potential to be really useful for asynchronous programming in general, and handling asynchronous programming through like functional programming techniques with the observer pattern, iterator pattern, and you know, if you're doing anything that's reactive to asynchronous data or events, hence the name of the library, Reactive JS or RxJS, we can start to see that this can be a quite powerful library to handle those situations. So this has just been an overview. We'll go into a lot more detail, and in the next video we'll talk about observables.